Hi everyone, I'm Paul, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about why you shouldn't try to pick the top or the bottom in Bitcoin, or really any market for that matter. And if you stick around until the end, I'll tell you what I do when these scenarios present themselves. This video is a bit of a rant and completely my opinions, so if you're feeling brave, let's jump in. The first point is that picking bottoms and tops is only 100% accurate in hindsight. That's revolutionary, I know, but the reality is we can only pick the top or the bottom after the fact. We never know when we're in it. Everything else ultimately is just a hypothesis, and like with any discussion, you've got to be really careful to separate the narrative from the facts. And even with facts can be cherry-picked to support a narrative, so you have to be really careful. The second point is that it's a coin flip. Whether a particular point in time is the top or the bottom is ultimately a 50-50 probability. Anyone who tells you anything else isn't really being honest. They're just guessing as well, and ultimately they'll have a narrative which supports their own bias. This is human nature, and you'll notice that groups of people will rally around a particular narrative that suits their bias. This is what tribalism is all about, and this is why when you look at the market, whether you look at social media or you're talking to friends, people ultimately fall into categories of either bulls or being bears. And if you scratch the surface of their arguments and find out what their bias is, that'll often give you an insight into their narrative. So for example, if someone's just bought or they're long, ultimately they're going to have a bullish narrative. If you've got someone who's sold all of their holdings, or they've been a Bitcoin detractor forever and think it's worth nothing and should go to zero, they're going to have a bearish narrative. So as investors, we need to be aware of this. Other people have a bias, we also have a bias, and it's very easy to fall in the trap of a narrative. The third point is that it's all relative anyway. Tops and bottoms are relative to your investment horizon, your investment thesis, and where we are in the current market cycle. If you're a long-term holder and you really believe in the Bitcoin story, it really shouldn't matter whether we're in a market top or bottom formation. Your view ultimately hasn't changed. Of course, this can change if your financial circumstances change or if something fundamentally changed to the Bitcoin hypothesis in terms of regulation or something like that. But barring those kinds of circumstances, you'd have to ask yourself the question, if I'm really worried about whether it's a top or a bottom, is there something else underlying those questions? And I'd say to you that if that's the case, if you are worried, then that should be a bit of a red flag. My thinking would be, if you have these thoughts, you're probably overexposed, and that's why you're too sensitive to whether we're at a top or to a bottom. Now, I appreciate there's a timing issue to this. If you're a new investor into a market and you've just say bought in the last few months, you may have bought at a higher price and the market pulls back and now you're sitting in a loss, and you may have only ever known a losing position in that particular asset or market, whether that's Bitcoin or otherwise. But again, this comes back to exposure, and this comes back to your investment thesis and your time horizon. If you're not overexposed, if your fundamental views underpinning the initial investment hasn't changed, that shouldn't change your investment behavior. So as always, one of the biggest challenges for investors, particularly new investors, is exposure. Are you overexposed? Have you put too much into the market? Is it money you can't afford to lose? Is it money that you can't really afford to have locked up over a long time horizon? The fourth point is that picking tops and bottoms is ultimately just ego stroking. As humans, we have this unquenchable desire to be right, and we also want to be able to project some element of control over scenarios which we really don't have any control. Making predictions makes us feel good and makes us feel like we have some element of control over something that is, like, let's be honest, has way too many factors and is way too complicated for our puny little monkey brains to possibly comprehend. So if you've seen my videos, you'll know that I'm obviously, like many other people, have tried to analyse the market and at times have tried to pick the bottom myself. But the caveat of this is I'm just trying to understand what the market's doing, like what I can see in front of me. And I'm trying to create then a framework to make decisions. And this framework basically allows me to take actions which are based on some kind of strategy or plan rather than being reactive to the market. And this is very different to someone who might say, with authority, this is what's going to happen. And as we've expressed in the rest of the video, is that no one knows with certainty until after the fact, and anyone who says that isn't really being honest. They're probably subject to their own bias, and it's really a coin flip at any given time. So that's all great. So what do you do when you're in one of these situations, maybe a top or a bottom, and maybe you need to take some kind of action? You need to either exit a position or you're looking to enter the market, and you're in this situation. So what do you do? Well, I'm going to share with you how I approach these situations, and I'm going to use the current market environment. We're at a particular turning point at the market at the moment. We're right at the bottom of a trading range, and it's a coin flip whether we go up or down. And so we're in a situation where lots of people are trying to pick the bottom. I think that's the wrong thing to do. We shouldn't be trying to pick the bottom. We should be trying to create a framework, and depending on what the market does, that then triggers options for us that we've already pre-planned. So let's have a look at the chart. So we're looking at the daily chart in Bitcoin. What I've done is plot the whole year, so all of 2021 right up until the beginning of 2022. And what you can see is that we've essentially been sitting in a trading range for about a year, probably a bit more. So you can see as we came into 2021, we came into the trading range, we traded up towards the top of the trading range, up here, up into the high 60,000s, all the way back down now here until the 29,000, and then back up again and then back down. So the thing we know with trading ranges is that as price approaches the either top or bottom of the trading range, it has a habit to vacuum up there. And so that's a high probability chance of happening. So given where we are, there's a good chance we could vacuum down to this 29.3 level. The other thing that's been working against us at this point is there's been this downward sloping resistance, which has been in since the all-time highs, and every time the market's butted up against it, it's pulled back. If we look at where we are in the market, we have this downward resistance, we have this support down here at 29.3, and so we're really getting to decision time in the market. Something's going to have to break. At this point, everyone's trying to pick, are we at the bottom, which means obviously things will, price will move to the upside, or are we just going to shoot lower? If we drop below this 29.3 mark, you can see there's nothing really below there in terms of support. It's a long way back down, and we probably go down, way down here to 12,000, 10,000, some form of long-term support. So this is a real line in the sand. Equally, if we break through this downward resistance and into this sort of 40,000 mark, then at the bottom here was in, and that the market's probably going to rally up, and then there's a good chance that the bull case is still firmly in play, and the market could shoot, quite a lot higher. We might reach that market cycle top in the future. But equally, if we break below this, the bull market's over, and we're probably going to go into a long bear cycle. And so really, where it goes from here is ultimately a coin flip. No one can really say with any certainty where we're going to go. If we look at volume, we can see that there's a pocket of support and resistance here. There's been a lot of volume over the course of the year in this zone, and this line here, which is about 33.5, is what's called a point of control. So there's been the most volume in this whole period right there, and you can see that's acted as near-term support. But picking the bottom, saying that this point that we hit down here, in the 32,000s when the market spiked down, saying that that was the bottom is really a dangerous lens to apply, because we really don't know. It's still way too early. And so my thinking in these types of situations is that rather than try and feel super clever and pick, I'm going to wait. So I know that if I see a break past this point here, this downward sloping resistance, the probability that the bull market is still alive is much higher. Not a little bit higher, much higher. Equally, if we break down into this zone, we're more at risk. And if we break below this support, then I know the probability that the bear market is in and we're going to go into a long-term bear cycle is equally very high. And so what I'm going to wait for is for these confirming actions to happen. I'm not going to try and make a call here because I really don't have enough information. It's a 50-50 here, and as we break either through this resistance or break through this support down here, the probability goes up quite a lot. In this scenario, I myself am looking to accumulate more Bitcoin. I think that, in terms of my investment thesis, I still believe in the future of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies just in general. And so for me, I don't want to buy here because I still know that there's just too much probability that will, one, come down towards this downward part of this longer term trading range. There's a high probability that that could happen. And then if we come down to that support level, there's obviously a risk then that we break through it. And as I said, if we break through that, the probability is very high that we're in a bear market. So I don't want to be taking a long position here when there's still too much uncertainty that we could come down lower. So if I wait, even though I'm giving up a little bit of upside, if we got in around here, that's 37. And if I waited to get in, at around 40,000 or just a bit below, if we break through this point, yes, I'm giving away a little bit of upside, but I've got far more certainty that the bull market is still intact. And so I can buy there with a lot more confidence. And again, I can put a stop down here somewhere if I wanted to look at that as a shorter term trade, because I know that there's this quite strong point of control there. So if the market was to fall through that again, that would again be a danger signal. But if we went through this point, I know with a lot more confidence the market's going up. The takeaway ultimately is that it's fine to hypothesize about market tops or bottoms, but rarely should you take action at that particular point. You should use that hypothesis, and it might be someone else's hypothesis, that's completely fine as well, but you use that as a lens to then create a decision framework to take actions from. And those actions should then create a higher probability or confirm the hypothesis and increase the probability of you being correct. I think it's much better to give away a little bit of upside or downside, depending on the direction of your trade, for a much higher probability trade. In the long term, as an investor or a trader, that's going to be much more important and going to make you more consistently profitable over time, rather than taking more speculative, higher risk positions or higher risk trades just for a little bit extra upside. If you found this video helpful, it'd be great if you could like it. That helps other people to find it. And if you enjoy my content, it'd be great if you could subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next video.